This is God and Autobiography, the podcast, a dramatic adaptation and continuing discussion of the book, God and Autobiography as Told to a Philosopher by Jerry L. Martin. He was a lifelong agnostic, but one day he had an occasion to pray. To his vast surprise, God answered in words. Being a philosopher, he had a lot of questions, and God had a lot to tell him. Episode 200. Hello, and welcome to the 200th weekly episode of God and Autobiography, the podcast. I'm Scott Langdon, your host, and since I'm also the creative director, I thought I might, if you'll indulge me, take this numerical milestone as an opportunity to reflect a bit on what this podcast has meant to me, and why I'm so grateful to be able to continue to work on it. As many of you know, it began as an audio adaptation of Jerry Martin's book, God and Autobiography as Told to a Philosopher. That took 44 episodes. So why the other 156 and counting? Well, I guess it's just because we like to talk about God's story. And since God's story and our stories are so intertwined, so connected in the way they're developing, it only makes sense to continue to tell these stories in an effort to understand ourselves and God maybe even just a little bit better each week. So this week, as we stop and look around for a moment, here at 200 weekly episodes gone, I invite you to join us for a joyful look back to how we started, a grateful exploration of how we got here, and a hopeful thought or two about what lies ahead. We begin this week where it all began, with a love story. I hope you enjoy the episode. In February of 2020, I was hired by Jerry Martin and his wife Abigail Rosenthal Martin to help promote Jerry's book, God and Autobiography as Told to a Philosopher, through social media. So naturally, the first thing I did was read it. What attracted me to the idea of turning this project into a podcast in the first place was the way the book read when I first read it. It read like dialogue, because that's exactly what it was. God and Jerry had these conversations, and they'd been written down by Jerry. In the physical book, God's words are in bold-faced type, and Jerry's are in italics. The narrator of the book is Jerry himself, guiding the reader through the story as it happened to him. After considering several different ideas, Jerry, Abigail, their wonderful executive assistant Laura Buck, and I decided an audio adaptation of the book would work well, and that a platform like a podcast might be the best way to offer it out to the world. What followed was 44 individual episodes that comprise the audio adaptation of God and Autobiography as Told to a Philosopher. Jerry Martin, who heard the voice, speaks the voice of God. Abigail Rosenthal speaks her own voice, Sarah Lynn Dewey speaks the female voice of God, and I speak the voice of Jerry Martin. God and Autobiography as Told to a Philosopher is a first-person account of Jerry Martin's unexpected conversations with God, and it begins with Jerry giving a bit of a backstory. Here's a clip from Episode 1, I Pray to a God I Don't Believe in.
It is said you don't have to believe in God in order to pray. That is what happened to me. I had been divorced for many years. I always thought I would be happier married, but as the decades rolled on without Miss Wright showing up, I began to think she never would. Then one day the phone rang. It was Abigail Rosenthal. She was a professor at Brooklyn College, a school with an outstanding liberal arts curriculum. The new college president had decided to replace core courses that opened students to the whole world of learning with telescope from wide vista to keyhole view, a focus on the borough of Brooklyn. The one thing the students knew already, in fact, knew better than their professors. Rosenthal and a colleague in the history department were fighting the change. They had succeeded in rallying most of the faculty, but the administration was driving a steamroller. She called the higher education organization I ran in Washington, D.C. Could we help? Yes, that is what we do, I said. Our only hope was to take the issue to the public, and we did. The battle raged in the press through the spring and into the summer. Abigail and I talked almost daily, strategizing and getting the story out. None of the talk was personal, and we never met. Yet I found myself thinking, this is a very remarkable woman. In fact, I fell in love with her over the phone. Oh, and we won the fight. I was not just in love, I was completely overwhelmed.
Jerry had literally answered the call to love when he picked up the phone for Abigail that first day. He didn't know it then, but he figured it out soon enough. And to his delight, so did Abigail.
I would have been in sad shape had Abigail not had similar feelings, but she too responded to what she called the summons of love.
Dinner last night was disturbingly interesting.
That was, according to Abigail, her diary entry the day after a lovely New York dinner we had following our victorious campaign against the administration of Brooklyn College. Thinking to maintain her feminine elusiveness, she nevertheless warned in a stream of modals,
If there may be, or might be, or possibly could be something personal at some point, perhaps between us, we should make sure it doesn't interfere with our efforts for Brooklyn College.
My lips said, of course, the college comes first. But my heart said, she loves me.
Jerry and Abigail had both been open to and responded to the summons of love, as Abigail so beautifully put it, and that might have been it. But Jerry did something further, something that felt as natural as anything had ever felt. He had been changed by this love, and he was grateful. Here's more from episode 1.
One summer morning, I felt an urge to express my thanks, to pray, to whomever. I did not see any reason not to express what I genuinely felt, so I fell to my knees, as I had been taught as a child, and thanked the Lord. I now believed in love, but not much else. I did not know if I was praying to the God of Israel, to Jesus of Nazareth, or for all I knew, to the Lord Krishna, worshipped by Hindus, or simply to a benign universe. I didn't worry about that. I just poured out my heart in prayer. A few weeks later, I felt the same urge and said another prayer of thanks, still addressed to a Lord I did not actually believe in. This time, to my surprise, I offered to be of service to a God I didn't believe existed. Inconsistent, of course, but not insincere. Toward the end of a long summer day, Abigail and I were sitting on a park bench along the Potomac, across from the Lincoln Memorial. She was writing in her journal, and I was pondering the challenge of making a future together. Without thinking much about it, much less expecting an answer, I prayed again, this time asking for guidance. Immediately, a visual image appeared like a hologram a few feet in front of me. A rising, sparkling, multicolored fountain. It radiated vitality and promise, an answer to my prayer. But there was more. A voice spoke.
Listen.
The voice did not sound particularly different from my own inner voice, but it wasn't me talking. I looked at Abigail to see if she heard it, but she continued writing, undisturbed. I asked, not out loud, "What is this voice? Who are you?"
I am God.
The God of Israel?
I am the God of all.
The fact that Jerry and Abigail responded to the call of love the way they did changed their lives, both individually and together as they became a couple. Love doesn't always show up in someone's life looking like romantic love, though it did in this case. Love is a calling from God, and we all get that call constantly and consistently in our own ways. If we can be open to whatever form it might take in our lives, a natural feeling of wanting to participate more fully in that love will follow, and our response can alter everything about the lives we're living. It certainly did for Jerry and Abigail, and it most definitely did for me. As our work on the audio adaptation of God and Autobiography as Told to a Philosopher was coming to a close with episode 44, we felt the desire to keep going. So we decided to talk to one another about the whole thing. I interviewed Jerry, then Abigail, then Jerry and Abigail together as a couple. Then Jerry interviewed me. I even got to interview my wife, Sarah, who lent her voice to the production on 2 different occasions. That was a wonderful experience for me to talk about the project and reflect on what it meant to make it. But still, we felt there was more to do. So we began to make episodes with content we thought was interesting and possibly helpful. Jerry and Dr. Richard Oxenberg had sat down for a set of dialogues about God and autobiography, and we decided to bring those into the mix of developing content. So I adapted them for the program. You can always hear those dialogues on this podcast, and you can now also read them in the newly released book form titled Two Philosophers Wrestle with God, a Dialogue. Have a look on Amazon for this new release. Readers and listeners began writing in with email questions and comments, so we started doing the What's on Your Mind series, which I really enjoy. Folks wanted to hear more from Jerry himself, so From God to Jerry to You was formed. Several experts in the field of religious studies and spiritual growth agreed to help share the profound message of a God who truly is with us in all things and in all situations. So Jerry sat down with them one at a time, and they each discussed with Jerry a particular episode of the podcast, combing it for little and sometimes huge gems of wisdom for how one might live a more God-centered life. And that's how the Life Wisdom Project came to be. And of course, we have offered regularly over these past 4 years perhaps my favorite series of episodes we produce here, What's on Our Mind. This was an idea I had early on, and I relish the opportunity every time we make a new one. Being able to talk with Jerry about the difficult questions of life and then to be able to go back and listen to these conversations again and again, it's a fantastic blessing I had no idea I'd be able to take advantage of when I first took the job. And I'm so glad I did. We started out this episode with a look at Jerry and Abigail's response to the call of love. I mentioned how it changed their lives and mine. As I also mentioned, I had been initially hired to work with social media. That changed, of course, as the podcast got underway. After a time, though, we realized we needed a special social media touch that none of us had. That's when God delivered Amanda Horgan to us. What a rock star she's been for us and for this podcast. I've been so blessed and honored to work for Jerry and Abigail. If you know much about me, then it's likely you know how much I love the story A Christmas Carol. And if you know A Christmas Carol, then you'll know what I mean when I say I work for the Fezziwigs. Jerry and Abigail are some of the most generous people I have ever encountered. Their conviction and desire to live a God-centered life is lived out daily in how they treat others, especially those of us in their employ. And it's that kind of atmosphere that keeps the soul lifted, even in the dark times. These past 4.5 years have been an amazing growth experience for me. I see the world so much differently now, and I know God now in ways I have always known Him, but didn't fully understand and wasn't able to surrender to. God's message to Jerry is a timely one, and God has made that abundantly clear. Here's a clip from episode 44. God tells me about a new age of spiritual development.
You stand on the threshold of a new spiritual era, a new axial age, in which for the first time, spiritually attuned individuals will draw their understanding of spiritual reality, not just from the scriptures of their own religious tradition, but from the plenitude of my communications to men and women. The upshot will not be a bland acceptance of all so-called scriptures and theological traditions, as if they all said the same thing. As you can see, they do not. But the more accurate of them can be fitted together in a meaningful way. This is not just a conceptual puzzle solving, as if the challenge were purely intellectual, how to fit the largest number of pieces into a single coherent story. It is most fundamentally spiritual. How to sense which writings and experiences are truly sensitive to the divine reality, and how to put them together in a way that is spiritually meaningful, whether or not it seems logical.
Lord, are the world's religions converging on the cutting edge of spiritual development?
Yes, that's right. It's time for them to come together, not merely putting the pieces together, but in a dynamic way, a way that lends itself to forward development.
What do you mean?
As people from different traditions take in elements from other traditions, they will make something of that. It won't just be a passive reception, it will be a creative, very dynamic process. For example, as a Christian takes in the truth of the Atman, truth in scare quotes, because the Hindu truth of the Atman is not the final truth. It leaves the Christian perspective out, for example. Understanding the Atman will be shaped and expanded and connected to other elements not present or not so fully present in the Hindu tradition. As the Hindus or Chinese fully take in the personal God of the Old Testament, as they take in the reality of Jesus, they will be transformed.
Resulting in a single world religion?
There's no way human beings will all subscribe to a single religion, any more than all philosophers agree. But they will no longer be hermetically sealed, looking at one another over tall, thick walls, sending bullets, or when you're lucky, flowers back and forth. It will be a creative ferment in which religions borrow freely from each other and individuals borrow from all religions and create their own creeds and rituals.
Will this mean the end of the old religions?
Of course not. The early Christians absorbed Greek philosophy and still remained Christians. There are many other examples of religious syncretism. Some resulted in new traditions, others were fully absorbed by an existing tradition.
Once religions and individuals take in truths and revelations from each other, will that be the end of the process?
Of course, it won't be the end. There will be new developments and new communications from my side, and new developments and events and consciousness from the world's side. The cutting edge of spiritual development will continue.
As God made clear to Jerry in God and Autobiography as Told to a Philosopher, there is work to be done now and going forward. This podcast is just a small part of that work being done in our own little corner, and we hope it inspires you to explore the divine calling within yourself. Thank you for joining us for 200 episodes. We hope you'll stick around for much more. Thank you for listening to God and Autobiography, the podcast. Subscribe for free today wherever you listen to your podcasts and hear a new episode every week. You can hear the complete dramatic adaptation of God and Autobiography as Told to a Philosopher by Jerry L. Martin by beginning with episode 1 of our podcast and listening through its conclusion with episode 44. You can read the original true story in the book from which this podcast is adapted, God and Autobiography as Told to a Philosopher, available now at Amazon.com and always at godandautobiography.com. Pick up your own copy today. If you have any questions about this or any other episode, please email us at questions@godandautobiography.com and experience the world from God's perspective, as it was told to a philosopher. This is Scott Langdon. I'll see you next time.